And hello again, and here we are back in my garage on a very rainy day for part 5 of my series on how to build a toolkit to work on your motorbike at home if you're just starting out. So in part 1 to 4 we covered, let's see, spanners, sockets and wrenches and drivers, pliers and screwdrivers. So now I'm just looking at my toolboxes here and saying, well, what have I missed? And obviously you can spend an absolute fortune on tools, you never have enough, but in this particular episode I want to talk about kind of one-off tools, things that you really need to have that don't really fit into any particular category. So to start off then, a really vital, important tool you need to have is a torque wrench. So I've got one here. What's a torque wrench? Well, it's got a setting on it so you can change it and set it so that it tells you how tightly you're tightening up a particular fastener on your bike. Now what you do is, this actually is like a mechanical one. It's got a scale on it and you turn the handle here and screw it up. When it gets to that mark, you use it on your fastener just like you would with a spanner or a socket as normal. But when it reaches the limit that you set, it makes a click, and that tells you to stop tightening up the bolt because you've hit your mark. And if you look in any decent owner's manual, Haynes manual, climber manual, whatever, there will be a whole list of settings for all the important fasteners, nuts and bolts and so on your bike, and it tells you what the torque settings should be for all those fasteners. Something like, you know, 20 pound-feet or 20 Newton meters. I mean, these are scaled in both. I'm old now, so I still use pounds-feet, but modern people, I guess, young lads use Newton meters these days, but I prefer pound-feet anyway. So that's what you do with them. So this one here is the first one I bought many years ago, made by a company called Norbar. It says made in Britain, so you know it's bloody old. And this goes from 0 to around 105 pounds-feet of torque, which covers the vast majority of settings you'd ever find on a motorbike. It actually is falling apart at the moment, the little knob at the ends fell off and so on. And it's got a little window down here. As you screw it, the window moves and it tells you what the setting is, and you use it. This is one I bought more recently because this one is getting on a bit now, and it's got a 1/2 inch drive on it. And on a motorbike, you really want to be using one with a 3/8 drive. So I bought this 3/8 driver from Teng Tools. Really like it. It's got a scale here. Screw it up. When you get to the appropriate place, you stop and you use it. This goes from 0 to 85 pounds-feet of torque, which again covers a huge range that you'd ever need on your motorbike. There may be the odd fastener, like maybe, I don't know, a swing arm pivot bolt, a nut, maybe a wheel spindle nut, that might be a bit higher, but there aren't very many fasteners on a motorbike that are higher than 85 pounds-feet of torque. I also bought myself recently, and this is a new one, same thing, but this is a 1/4 inch driver. And I bought this because it's obviously being 1/4 inch, you can get it into little nooks and crannies. But that's not the real reason. The real reason I bought it was because the scale on this thing goes from 0 to 25. It's very small numbers, but it does mean that you can set it very accurately within that range. Certainly more accurately than you can with this one. And that's why I like it, because it's surprising how many fasteners on a bike, you know, the fastener settings are something like, torque settings are 11, 9, 16, you know, it's a very small figure, so I find this very helpful for that. In terms of cost, this one here, the big one, the 3/8 drive, that's about 65 or 70 pounds. This is a bit cheaper at about 55 on eBay, that is, on eBay. And I must say I've not had them long, but I've been using them quite a lot, and yeah, I do recommend it. And you must buy yourself a torque wrench, because otherwise you'll be stripping threads and fastening things up incorrectly, either too tight or not tight enough, so you really need a torque wrench. And by the way, I do have another type of torque wrench here, an old one, which is nothing like these. This weird thing here, it's very old-fashioned, but yeah, it works. How it works is that you've got a pointer which is on a scale, you see there as it moves, and as you tighten something up, the central shaft here with the handle on, that'll bend, it's made to bend. So as it bends, as you apply more and more torque to something, to a nut or whatever, this will move across the scale here, and it tells you how tight you're applying the force. So very crude, but it works. I actually bought this many years ago for doing things like car wheel nuts, that sort of thing. I can't say I've used it a lot recently, but yeah, it works. nothing to break. The only thing I would say is it's quite big and bulky and difficult to use on a motorbike, and also you really need to get your eye level with the scale to look at it accurately, so again, not very helpful, but I just thought I'd show you that. And in fact, I was impressed once because I once worked for a manufacturer that had a tool shop, and in the tool shop they calibrated all the tools used on the production line, and the guys there said, well, you know, that's not bad, it works, you know, it works quite well, and you shouldn't sort of be ashamed of using it because it works, it's nothing to break, so use it, you know, and don't worry about it. So I was quite surprised at that, because I thought they say, oh no, they're rubbish, don't use that. So that's torque wrenches. You must get yourself a torque wrench. What else is a must is, yeah, let's talk about Allen keys. So there's quite a lot of socket heads on motorbikes these days, so you need a set of Allen keys to undo them and tighten them up, and I use these kind here, and yeah, it's a metric, don't cost much, about a tenner, lasts forever. But there is one thing I would point out, is that, let me get the big one out, these are ball-ended keys. This end here got a sort of ball shape on the end, whereas that one's just a standard hex end, and that's important because it allows you to get this thing into a difficult to reach cap head bolt at a slight angle. You don't have to go in absolutely straight in there, it will work at an angle like that, so you can still undo things when you can't quite get it in perfectly. So they're really handy to have on a motorbike. These are quite cheap, I say about 10 quid. There are other kinds like T-handle ones here, like this. Again, these are actually made by Teng, I think, aren't they? Yeah, Teng. Same idea, they've got a ball-ended end here on the long end and an ordinary hex end on this side. Bit more comfortable to use, and you can probably get a bit more torque on them, but sometimes these are too big for access, so the old-fashioned simple keys, you know, work quite well. There are different kinds of fasteners, or these kind of fasteners on motorbikes. There are also some, let me find here, with what I call a star end. I'm not sure what the correct term is, but they don't have a hex end, they have like a star end. And the only place I've found them commonly on motorbikes is on the disc bolts that hold on the discs to the wheel. In particular, things like Harleys, yeah, they all seem to use these kind of fasteners, and that's the only place I've ever used these keys. But yeah, you might come across them at some point, but it's not essential, it's quite rare that you come across a certain kind of fastener. Right, so that's it then when it comes to Allen keys and torque wrenches. What's next? Hammers. Yes, hammer time. Let's talk about hammers. So you need a hammer for hitting things with and whatever, but using a big lump hammer like this, a big steel hammer on a motorbike, is not always a good idea because you can damage delicate parts. Lots of parts on a motorbike are aluminium, and hitting them with a steel hammer is not a good idea because you'll probably break things and crack the aluminium. So instead, I would recommend you get yourself one of these things. This is a nylon ended hammer, still pretty bloody, you know, hefty, but this won't damage your aluminium parts on the motorbike. And the good news is, although the aluminium ends do get battered a big manner, actually falling apart, they unscrew and you can buy new ones and just screw them in. The make to go for is Thor, T-H-O-R. They make a huge range of these things, and yeah, last you forever because you can change over the ends when they get a bit battered. That said, you do occasionally need to use a bloody big hammer like this. This is a £2 lump hammer, because you sometimes get situations where you just need to use some force. For example, removing a stuck spindle out of your front wheel or back wheel. It's stuck, it won't come out no matter what you do. You've got to hit it hard to get the damn thing out. What I would say is, if you find yourself in that position, put the nut back on the spindle and leave it proud by about 1 millimetre from the end of the spindle, then hit it with this thing. That way you're going to damage the nut and not the spindle. You can always buy a new nut, but you can't always buy a new spindle, or at least it'll cost you a lot more. So yeah, sometimes you need this, but more normally you need something like this. I've also got, in a similar vein, a rubber mallet. These are rubber, so again, handy for hitting things. Maybe you need to, I don't know, break the seal on a cam cover, just tap it with this thing. It won't really harm it, but it helps to displace the seal and open up the part you're trying to work on. So that's hammers. Next up then, let's talk about electrics and if you're going to work on electrics, which you probably will do, if you're working on your bike at home, you'll definitely need one of these things. This is a multimeter, allows you to measure resistance, current and voltage, and it's essential if you're working on your bike's electrics. Good news is these things have come down in price a huge amount, and you can buy something like this one here for about £10. It used to be hundreds of pounds, but now no, really cheap, work really well, can't complain. And all you do is you've got these two probes here, you put one on the live side, one on the other side, depending on what you're measuring. You turn this dial here to say what particular thing you want to measure, and it tells you what it finds, whether you've got voltage, what the voltage is, current and so on, AC, DC, or indeed resistance. Essential. It'll tell you, for example, if your battery's going out, if your rectifier's working okay, if your alternator's working okay. It'll help you find earth problems or bad connections on your bike. Essential. There are lots and lots of fantastic videos on YouTube telling you how to use this thing, so I'm not going to try. I'm not an expert electrician by any means, so I'll just say get yourself one of these. It is essential. But a slightly easier and simpler version of that is this thing. This is a little test screwdriver type thing, and you just put this little clip here on the earth of your bike, and whenever you touch that, it tells you the voltage and whether you've got any current flowing through it. The little red light comes on. Very handy, because this little point here you can get in little places, and you know, things that are difficult to reach, just get a little point in there and it tells you whether you've got a current or not. And I've been using actually this quite a lot recently with the problems I've had with my Motorbike project, but that's a different subject. So we got hammers, Allen keys, electrics, and torque wrenches. Is there anything else? I'm sure there are, but let me find some. Oh yes, I know something. You need one of these things. You need a torch. I've actually got several, and torches are really handy. You can get a little one, big one, but whatever. But even in a well-lit garage, you get little nooks and crannies you can't quite see what's going on. Get yourself a torch, because it'll help you see what's going on. In fact, these are magnetic, so they stick on anything metal. Very handy. Right, so what else then? What else? Oh, one more thing when it comes to electrics. If you're going to start having to fit terminals on the end of wires and so on, and rewire things, you'll need one of these things and one of these things. And this is a really cool bit of kit. Dead cheap, about 15 quid, whatever. But this strips the wires from the cables on your bike, and it saves you a huge amount of time. In fact, let me just go and find some wire I can show you. Hang on, can I find some wire? Let's find you some wire. Yeah, here's the indicator. So, with a wire, I'm going to strip the plastic off the outside so I can fit a terminal or whatever. All you do is you push it in this little machine here, clamps down, and it just pulls it, and it makes, you can't see from over there I guess, but I might do you a close-up in a minute, and it just removes the plastic from the wire. Saves you a huge amount of time, because on a motorbike there's an awful lot of these things. So let's imagine you now use that, and you now got to apply or fix on here a terminal, spade terminal, bullet terminal, or whatever. Well, you then need one of these things. These are crimpers, and these crimp the terminal on the end of your wire. There are lots of different kinds of these special tools. Let me see if I can find one. I've got this one here. This is one you'll probably see more often. These are really big and strong, and what you do is you go click, 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 and it locks up, and you've got to keep on pushing it really hard, and it releases it. If you go about halfway, it just locks. You've got to really do it tight. And they've got 3 settings here. One's yellow, blue and red. Now those are done if you're using these horrible plastic covered terminals, the ones with the blue, yellow or red cover. Don't use them. They're awful on a motorbike. Whenever I see them I think, oh no. I mean, what I do if I got some of them is I actually heat up the plastic and pull them off. Just pull off the plastic and use it without the plastic. I then use a heat shrink to cover up the end of the terminal. Much neater, much better. Yeah, just don't use those horrible yellow and blue and red terminals. They're horrible. Don't use them. So use this thing instead. It's got about 3 settings, but yeah, depends on what size terminal you're using, I guess. But these are essential. Again, very cheap. And in fact, if you buy a little kit of terminals, often you'll get one of these included in the kit. They're very cheap, about 5 quid, 10 quid. but essential if you're working on your bike and making your own terminals for electrical systems. So that's when it comes to electrics. Anything else we can, well, I can think of an awful lot more when it comes to electrics. Or I mean, what I won't do is I'm not going to talk about things like files and, you know, stuff like that, because that's all to do with fabrication, and the chances are you're not going to be using a file if you're just doing general maintenance on your bike. Yeah, because I've got an awful lot of tools down here. And next we come to measuring things, and to measure things you really need a vernier caliper. This is a vernier caliper. It measures how big things are and how deep holes are and so on. And this is a digital one, has a battery in the back of it. The battery's now dead, so I need to get a new battery for that. Again, really cheap, from about £10–15 off eBay or Halfords or whatever, Machine Mart, and really essential. It's great for measuring things, what bolt size you've got, how deep a hole is, you know, all kinds of useful stuff. How thick the shims are, if you're shimming up the valves on your engine, stuff like that, very helpful. This one's digital, but in the old-fashioned world that I live in, this is an analog one, needs no batteries, just use the scale that you read off, although I need my glasses now to read that, but again, works really well. So that's for measuring things. Oh yes, there's another tool you need for measuring things, and it's very specific, and it's this thing here, or these things. This is a feeler gauge, or a set of feeler gauges, like little fingers, and there's steel plates with and they're all different thicknesses, and the thickness is stamped on each of the fingers, and you use that for measuring your valve clearances on the engine. How it works is that you've got a clearance, a gap, and you need to sort of measure that gap accurately. So you start off with quite a thin feeler gauge, and it goes in that gap, no problem. You then go up to a thicker one, a thicker one, a thicker one, a thicker one, until you get to the point where the last one you did wouldn't go in that gap, it's too thick. So you know the gap is somewhere between the one that won't fit and the one below in terms of thickness. So if, say, a 0.6mm feeler gauge wouldn't fit, but a 0.5 would, you know the gap's something like 0.55, and that's good enough to measure your valve clearances accurately. So again, dead cheap. Normally they're stamped both metric and imperial, although normally you'd just be using imperial. So yeah, in fact I've got loads of these. I've got about 5 sets, and I keep on losing the damn things. So I'm glad I found that. So that's for measuring. That's for measuring. So what else? Oh yes, finally, sometimes you got to cut things, you know, maybe a paper gasket, just anything you want to cut that's quite soft. You need a Stanley knife, and if a Stanley knife is too big and cumbersome, what I use is this little craft knife, little scalpel, which is bloody sharp. That's why I keep the cover on it. Don't want to cut myself, so that comes in handy occasionally for cutting things like a gasket, something like that I need to cut. So yeah, they come in handy. Not used it very often, but yeah, useful when needed. So that's pretty much it when it comes to one-off type tools that you need in your toolbox at home. So this is now the end of part 5. I have no doubt missed off loads of decent, useful tools, but we have to stop somewhere. So if you've got all the things I talked about in parts 1 to 5, then I think you've got a good start on building your toolbox to use on your motorbike at home. So this will be the last video of the series that I'm making. And so that's it. So thanks for watching, and cheers.